Hello, 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 and welcome to this special edition of What Sharon Said. We're at episode 8, y'all, of 10 that was my goal for this year, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And today I am talking about 5 years of Sharon's anti-racism newsletter. I was very tempted to call this episode It's My SARNiversary, but I think I used that already last year. The point is that we are now officially in year 6, and I am so glad that you're here to celebrate with me. In fact, this is one of my favorite weeks to be in my Stripe account because it's the time when all the people that took a bet on this newsletter when it was barely a thing renew their subscriptions. Kathy, Kirsten, Mitch, Jared, Alice, and quite a few more. Thank you for believing in SARN from the beginning. And of course, I am wearing my Believe Black Women SARN t-shirt as well in honor of the occasion, because, that is truly a thing. So yeah, I hope I'm coming through loud and clear to you over on LinkedIn and YouTube. As far as I can tell, the tech is behaving itself. And hey, hello, Mitchell Allen. Yes, he is one of the OG supporters of Sharon's anti-racism newsletter. Comments on almost everything, great feedback. And, there are a few of you like Mitch, and I truly appreciate you because that's what helps keep the newsletter what it is. That helps me know that I am delivering what is needed. And so it is just absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I've been reflecting on those last 5 years on LinkedIn and elsewhere, and I'm going to share a couple of those reflections here. Because when I started the newsletter, honestly, or just before it became a newsletter, it was because I had to speak out. I had to say something about all the racism I'd experienced, all the racism I was observing, and the writing has always been one of my favorite tools for self-healing. I have written fairly regularly since I was in my teens. Not all of it good, I will admit, because all of us have those angsty teenage pieces that we have to get out of our system before we get to, what's really our voice. But yeah, I needed a way to process what was going on. But I didn't realize that other people needed it too. And so this is what I learned by publishing those first couple of pieces, initially on Medium and then in the newsletter. That people needed to, people who shared my identity needed to see themselves reflected, know that they weren't alone, push back against the gaslighting, understand that what they were seeing and experiencing was real. Not that they didn't know it was real, but sometimes it helps to have another voice telling you that when, the world and edifice of whiteness is telling you something different. For those who had suddenly woken up to the fact that racism was a thing, they wanted to use it as a way to make sense of what had been beyond their awareness. They wanted to know what the next right thing to do was as an anti-racism advocate. And, for all of us, I think it was a way to find hope even when it seemed hopeless, right? To have insight that could be used for self-reflection, self-awareness, self-healing, self-acknowledgement, and for personal and organizational transformation. Because I know that these are some of the ways that SARN has helped people and supported them. I am currently collecting testimonials for this year's reader survey, which closes today. And I get a lot of joy out of seeing what my newsletter means to people. And I've published consistently since August 2020. After those first few pieces, which I published in early 2020, that became the foundation for the newsletter, I have now got an archive of more than 600 pieces, personal essays, interviews, reviews, curated reading lists, podcast episodes. In fact, I posted something about reading lists on my LinkedIn profile today because it's one of the things that is most popular. This idea that the newsletter for me is not just a megaphone for me. It's a way to lift others up. It's a way to support them. It's a way to bring other people into a wider awareness, as it were. And so it's always been a bit of that for me. So I'm really, I'm grateful to the people who have supported the work from the beginning, to those who have joined, to those who have been vocal in supporting it. Right. Hello, Asmara. 600 plus pieces. 600 pieces and counting, in fact. It's quite an achievement, really. It's quite an achievement. That's more than 120 pieces a year, although it didn't quite play out like that, but almost. The first year I did go a bit wild and I published a lot until realizing that neither the readers nor myself could keep up with that kind of cadence. And so, yeah, it has been a thing. It has been a great thing. Yes, interviews. Interviews have been one of the things that I was really, really pleased to add, because it's so important to find hope in what other people are doing and bringing to the table, to learn what's going on out there, to get other people's views and insights. As I said, it's not all about me, And so, yeah, I mean, from very, very humble beginnings, I had, I don't know, maybe 10, but by the end of the first year, I had 100 and something subscribers. So now looking back from 5,700 subscribers, that really seems like, wow, it has come a long way. It has definitely come a long way. And I'm really pleased about that. 5,700 plus subscribers, reading, commenting, sharing, 200 or so subscribers actually supporting the newsletter financially. And if that's you, one of those people, thank you very much. I would love to see the newsletter be sustainable, which it is not quite yet. And so, I'd love people to get subscriptions for their companies, educational institutions, organizations, for their friends, because gifts are a thing. But, I would love to know, as Mara's already led the way, what do you get from SARN? What would you like me to put up on screen to help mark this occasion? I did not know when I started writing in 2020 that I'd still be here 5 years later, and that this would become such a big part of my work, because it is. And now I'm starting to think about, okay, how else can I use this material to help end racism? I have some ideas about that. All right, so let me move on now to the learning segment. And in this, I'm going to share some of the behind the scenes numbers of SARN, right? Let's see, we have some in the chat. Oh, we have a question. What do I know now that if I had a TARDIS, I would absolutely go back and tell past Sharon? Well, I definitely tell past Sharon that you don't have to, just because you have written 20 essays, you don't have to repost them all the first week, right? And again, I might tell past Sharon, maybe build out some of those other learning journeys a little earlier in the process that I'm thinking about doing now. Apart from that, I'm reasonably happy with how it's gone. I think, there are lots of ways in which one can grow a newsletter. And this one has grown pretty organically. And I'm generally quite happy with that. Maybe I should, I don't know. I'm generally happy with how it has grown. I think it is a lot of work, but it is also a bit of a mission. So, what you're going to do? You kind of have to keep going. Yeah, I kind of have to keep going. So I talked just now about 600 pieces plus, but let me break that down. Almost half of those are personal essays, things that I've written out of my own experiences people have shared, things that have been happening in the news, and so on. 68 of those ish are hot takes, because at a certain point I decided to add in a podcast and, make it really short. I mean, most episodes are between 2.5 and 5 minutes, just to give quick insight into how I'm thinking about a particular thing. And that goes to the paid subscribers. Let me see what else we've got here in the chat. Thank you. I'm glad I answered your question, Asmara. Yeah. And so then, in terms of interviews, I can't remember the last time I counted, there were 80 something interviews. There are, I believe, 60 plus reading lists. I love bringing other people's work to the fore. It can never only be about my voice. It always takes all of us to fight racism, to undermine oppression and inequality. And so I've been very clear about that right from the very start. One of the things I published in the very first week of the newsletter was a reading list. And I'm sure before I got to the end of the first half year, I had published some interviews as well. Yeah. I'm so glad that you like the mini pod, because I guess in a way, I know that I tend to listen to things that are short more easily than I listen to things that are long. And because I have so much written material, I figured I could keep this one short. Yeah, what else? We have, oh yes, it was 96. It's actually almost 100 people that I've interviewed. I'm hopeful still that I'll hit the 100 before the year. I have a couple lined up. We'll see how it goes. In measuring the impact as well, here we go, another comment. Darren, epic content creation is giving me a scooch of imposter syndrome. Don't worry about it. Remember, I was a professional writer. I've done that for 3.5 decades or more. So really, the writing isn't so much of an issue, and the management of it comes from things that I learned working in magazines, really. I have a content calendar. I usually plan it out at the end of the previous year for the year ahead. And when I say that, I don't mean I know everything that is going to go in, but I know where the essays are going to be, where I'd like to put the interviews, where the podcast is going to be. And then I fill it out usually a month ahead. But I think everybody has to find a cadence that works for them. If I were to go back to answer again, Asmara's previous question, would I commit to publishing 10 times a month? I don't know, but there we are. Yes, I agree with Asmara. Don't even go there, because Taryn, your content on LinkedIn is absolutely epic. So, there's no need for imposter syndrome. We just lift each other up. Okay, so the reach is 5,700 plus reading. And I say plus because I know for a fact that people share this in their workplaces, they share it with their families. So the reach is much bigger than the subscriber numbers. And so the impact is the thousands of conversations happening in homes and workplaces about those experiences, about that content. And it's something I'd like to do more intentionally and maybe get more involved in. Certainly anybody who's been a long-term reader notices that, whereas at the beginning I was kind of just sharing, I quite often put in some sort of call for reflection or action now, because I want people to not just sit and consume. I want them to do something. I want them to make a change because of what they're reading. Prep time on the newsletter is somewhere around 16 hours a month, depending. A large part of that taken up for the reading list, for writing and scheduling, and then even more time on sharing, responding to comments, and anything that happens as a follow-up. One of the things I wrote on LinkedIn is that the emotional labor is endless. Because sometimes, and I'm sure many other activists can relate to this, sometimes you think, okay, this is something that's going on, I have an opinion, and some days you just don't feel like you have the energy. And then some days you do it anyway because you say, well, for posterity, this is something I would want to have written about, right? Yeah, I can understand. I so understand that, Taryn. And it's certainly what I have found, crafting content for others. The interesting thing that has happened in my career since I started doing the newsletter is that because when I started it, I was a full-time freelance writer and a fairly successful one. But, starting this newsletter basically changed my life because I ended up focusing more on anti-racism, on DEI, and also once I had started writing in my own voice, it became harder for me to want to write in somebody else's, you know? So I definitely relate to that. It is there's a point at which you want to make that switch, and sometimes you can't make that switch quite when you want to because people got to eat, right? But there's definitely a frustration at times when you're doing work for others and you just want the important messages that are needed, and the what you bring to the table to be valued in a way that allows you to sustain yourself. And so I don't mean in survival mode, I mean in thriving mode, to sustain yourself in thriving mode. And that seems to take a while to build. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I am very happy when people get insights and share them. One message I had earlier in the year was from somebody living in one of the Scandinavian countries who was being gaslit about the racism he was experiencing, and he happened to read my newsletter. I don't know how he found it. And he said, okay, now I know I'm not mad. I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining it, so to speak. I shouldn't use those terms, right? I'm not imagining it. It is true. And actually, I'm going to leave this country and go back to a Black majority country as soon as I possibly can, you know? I love also giving people a boost through the interview, through sharing an article, through including them in a reading list, you know. Let's see what we have here. Asmara, you're going to get there. You're going to get there. Yeah. And so it's, there's a lot that goes into this newsletter thing. And, I know every activist can relate to the fact that it is not always easy. Sometimes you do it in spite of what is going on and not just because of it. Sometimes you do it because you're committed to the greater goal. But there are people taking pot shots at you that undermine your identity, that don't want you to be, that don't want you to live, that don't want you to thrive. And so, yeah, for sure, it is not always easy. But it helps when you know that what you write and say makes a difference to people. And I know I'm in good company. A lot of people in my circles are those people. They write things, they drop nuggets of truth, Asmara, Taryn, loads of people. And, that helps, that being part of that wider community is something that helps to sustain me. So yeah, I definitely am determined, I'm determined to keep going. I'm determined to, even when the work isn't easy, because I know it's necessary. And I'm determined, now that I have a real substantial body of work, to find other ways to use that work for good, to find other ways. Oh, I love that. Everyone's anti-racism newsletter. I love that, Asmara. Yeah, it's definitely a thing I want to share. I want to bring other people to the fore. It can never only be about me, right? It can never only be about me. All right. So let us turn. That was life and that was learning. So I'm just going to I'm going to read something that I published yesterday on LinkedIn, just for the record. I was sharing a piece called "I'm Still Waiting," subtitled "For Racism to End," that I originally published early in 2020, and then published in the newsletter 5 years ago yesterday, I believe. And so that piece reflects many of the things that hadn't changed since enslavement and was an invitation to reflect on, how we could be free, but there was so much still wrong. And right now I feel like we're in that moment again, because we're still seeing the system of whiteness oppressing people of the global majority. We're still seeing the active collusion of those who know better but don't care. We still see people wanting to uphold a world order where holding a particular identity, the identity of whiteness, is a ticket to acceptability. It feels like we've been in this place before. It didn't work out so well last time, and why are we going there again? We see people vilifying those fleeing oppression instead of working to keep them safe. And we see people willing to collude in the oppression of others on the other side of the globe, Palestine, Sudan, Congo, to name a few, and making the people that raise these issues the problem instead of recognizing that there's a serious disconnect in our approach to humanity, the humanity of others. Some of these same people will find any justification for the cruelty of 47's actions, not realizing that they too will pay the price. Has anybody read First They Came? And shouldn't we all be honoring others, people's humanity, whether it benefits us personally or not? I was reminded yesterday of Dr. Martin Luther King saying, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And it seems to me that there's injustice everywhere at the time. So that message and the message of that original newsletter piece still rings true. And I still feel like we have work to do, which is why I keep going, which is why I keep going. For me, it's a matter of, this is part of my mission, this is part of my purpose, and the newsletter is what I bring to the world in order to do that. Okay, so turning to something a little bit lighter, I had promised a sneak peek of the reader survey results. So I'm just going to share a couple of those now, just so we can see. Let's see. All right, there we go. How long people have been subscribing to SARN, and we have quite a few people, 15% of readers since the very beginning, and quite a large percentage as well for 3 to 4 years. So that made me very, very happy indeed. Right. Okay, let me pull out another. Yeah. So this was about how people described themselves in terms of, where they were with their anti-racism, right? And as you can see, there's quite a mix. Lots of 20% committed anti-racist. We have some absolute beginners. We have some professionals. We have people who are committed to anti-racism, and we have a large number of people who have experienced racism and other isms as well. So weirdly, but also, it's good in a way, the newsletter manages to cater for all of these audiences. And so I'm so pleased about that. So anybody reading it will see content that reflects the experiences I've had as a Black woman, or as the parent of a biracial child, or as a person of the global majority in a white-dominated country, or as a person in a country where most people share my identity, but we're still dealing with colonialism. I've shared experiences other people have had in the workplace. One of the interesting things right at the beginning was that I worked in England for 15 years, and I shared my experiences from there, but people across the globe related to it, to those experiences. Yes, Taryn, the warriors keep pushing on. And that's what we have to keep doing. That's what we have to keep doing. We can't give up. Otherwise, the forces of evil win. I know it sounds very dramatic, but it is actually the truth. Okay, so people like the essays best. They like the interviews next best. You can't see that on this. And they like the reading list after that. strangely enough, I think it would be very interesting to do a separate thing because I get really good feedback on the podcast. But it doesn't score as well as some of the other parts of the newsletter. However, enough people enjoy it for me to keep going. So those of you who are big podcast fans, don't worry, it's not going anywhere. All right. So this is another interesting but not unsurprising thing. I was saying earlier that I started sharing experiences from my workplaces in the UK, but as you can see, most of my readers are in North America, and all of those people related to those same experiences, which underlines the fact that it is a global system, it is a global structure. And that is one of the things that I bring to the table from my experience living and working in different countries. And it's very important to me to show the underpinnings where I can and raise awareness that way. All right. I added a new question this year because I wondered where people were working. And so it's interesting. We have a lot of corporate and nonprofit readers. We have retired people. We have a few government people. And then we have people that kind of defy description. One of the other questions that I asked that I haven't revealed here was about how people were coping with changes in the rhetoric. So I think that's going to be quite interesting to analyze and see what people have to say. So yes, here we are. We're nearly at the end of this short celebration. I want to thank those of you who joined me live. Thank you to the team replay folks. It has really been an honor and a privilege to bring SARN to you. And here's to the future. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going, keep fighting racism, one article, one essay, one interview, one reading list, one podcast episode at a time. Thanks very much, and I will see you in all the online spaces. Bye.